come to one of our sessions, you know that we like to talk a little bit about who we are first. So with that, here on the slide, just sharing with you our mission, which is to connect people, foster professional growth through collaborative events, which educate our community on uncovering better ways to deliver value through Agile values, principles, and practices. And we take that collaboration seriously. So you're already seeing a lot of folks using the chat. Please join the conversation there. And we'll also save about 5 to 10 minutes for a little breakout room networking right before we kick off with our speaker. So we hope you'll participate and collaborate together. We're so glad to have you. All right, there we go. Want to highlight that something exciting is about ready to happen, and that is board elections. It is election time. So you're looking at pictures of those of us on the current board. If you are interested in being on the board with us, we would love to have you submit your candidacy form and a video, and I'll be posting the link to some information when I stop sharing my slides in a minute. So I'll put that in the chat window so that everybody will have it. Members can run. So this is the teaser. If you're not already a member of Agile Austin, for a mere $35, we think we're the cheapest ticket in town, or maybe the hottest ticket in town. Please become a member and consider voting and or running for the board. April 12th to May 5th is when you'll submit your candidacy forms, and the voting period begins May 13th through 20th, and we'll announce the new board on May 21st, and you'll get to meet them at our June monthly feature session. So consider it. We'd love to have you. Also, if you have not attended one of our SIGs before, I'm pretty biased. I think they're awesome. We're a pretty active community. And as you can see here on the slide, coaching, Scrum Master, book club, DevOps, leaders, Agile at Scale, Lean Kanban, product, several different SIGs that meet on a regular basis each month, getting a lot of great speakers, a lot of good engagement. And so we'd love to see you there. We have events coming up in April, book club. If Ned is on with us, you can ask him questions in the chat and he'll tell you all about it. Agile at Scale will be metrics at every flight. Scrum Master is going to be using Scrum part-time to deliver non-software business value. And then in May, our coaching SIG will have a tale of two certs, a conversation about the Agile Coaching Expert Cert and Enterprise Coaching Expert Cert through IC Agile. Continuing the book club conversation, and the leader SIG is going to talk about shifting culture to enable business agility with Dave and Paul. So you'll get a second round with them, especially if tonight you get lots of good nuggets. Joining on May 7th will be, I think, a great experience as well. As I mentioned already, you can join Agile Austin. So that's www.agileaustin.org/join. $35 a year. You get access to our Slack channel, get to vote for the board, run for the board. We do end of the year parties and socials where we give away prizes. So we try to make it worth your time. And also want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. Agile Velocities continue to be our platinum sponsor and help ensure that our events run. And when we're back in person, we get pizzas and sodas and good stuff to have. And we're so grateful for them to support us, along with our gold, silver, and bronze sponsors, which we're so grateful for. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor today, head over to the agileaustin.org website, and you can click on the link about becoming a sponsor and see the benefits there, along with steps on how to become a sponsor. We're always looking for more sponsors. And then just want to highlight our feature speaker series. So tonight, we're going to be diving into Agile culture with Dave Saboe and Paul Pazderski, and he's going to correct me when he comes on. When I butcher that, I'm sorry, Paul. In May, we're going to have a Texas Roundup open space session. We're really excited about that. We've got the Austin meetups, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio meetups coming together, and we're going to try an open space for our May 11th evening. So really hope that you come, you get to meet everyone, and we're going to experiment together, see how it works, and see if that's something we may want to do again in the future. In June, we're going to do a social for our monthly speaker series. Instead of a speaker, just a social hour, a chance to network, have some fun, as well as meet the new board members. And then in July, high performance teams with Richard Kasparowski. And we'll be getting our fall speaker lined up, so we'll get to share some of those details with you as we know them more. Also, we want to make sure we're using this space to share of any job opportunities. If you're looking for a job or you know of any openings, please utilize the chat. I'm going to do my best to remember to save it. I'm getting much better at that now. And we'll post both the link to the video as well as the chat in the meetup page for us to access later. And with that, we've saved about 12 minutes, about 10 to 12 minutes for networking and just socializing. So we've heard from several folks that they miss having the opportunity to just connect with people before we dive in to our speakers. And so what I'm going to do is create very random breakout rooms. And what I'll share with you is you're under no obligation to join them. If you're going through some Zoom fatigue and you need a break, and being on Zoom and chatting with people is not for you, just don't accept the invite when it comes your way. But if you are up for connecting with folks and just saying hi and chatting about anything and everything, then please accept the breakout rooms. And we'd love to give you that time. And like I said, if you're not interested, feel no obligation just to refuse that the invite. And I'm going to create them now and see if I can set up the time. 10 minutes. There we go. So for 10 minutes, you all will have an opportunity to chit chat, and then we'll bring you back and we'll kick off Agile Culture with Paul and Dave. So enjoy your networking. Well, great. I hope that was a good experience and everybody enjoyed having a chance to either take a deep breath for those that opted to just kind of hang out. And then for those that got to socialize, I hope you had a chance to meet some new faces or catch up with old friends. So glad. So glad that you all are here. Okay. All right. So with that, I want to talk about shifting culture to enable business agility. Woohoo! We're super excited to have Paul and Dave with us tonight. Both are enterprise agile coaches. Both have experience speaking at conferences, but also have a wealth of experience to draw from, which I think is going to be really important as we dive into the world of culture and how we make culture changes in the midst of transformation and changes. And so with that, I am going to hand the reins over to Paul and Dave. And we're just, like I said, super glad to have you tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for having us. Let me begin the screen share.
Perfect.
All right, there we go. Okay, so thanks for joining us, everyone. And I know joining another Zoom call after day meetings might be hard, so appreciate your time today. What we want to talk about today, again, is shifting your Agile culture. So when we're leading an Agile transformation, culture always wins. No matter what we do, no matter what processes we put in place, culture is going to win. Culture is that human operating system upon which everything else runs. To get the most out of Agile ways of working, you need a culture that's compatible to that. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far. So we're going to introduce to you what we call the ABC culture shift method. And at a high level, it's a way of thinking about how you transform or shift a culture into one more compatible with Agile. So in our analysis, we've looked at Frederic Laloh's organizational models, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, personal experience, and other references that really help to shape and identify where we need to go, where we're starting from, and kind of how to get there. So we're going to give you today an overview of that ABC culture shift method. Obviously, we don't have time to dive too deep, but we'll give you an overview of the method that we've introduced and give you a good grounding and maybe a good way of thinking about how to shift your culture, or at least think about how culture relates to your Agile transformation or the value that you're getting out of Agile practices and an Agile mindset. So before we begin, I want to introduce my partner in crime here, Paul Pazderski. Paul is an enterprise Agile coach. He's a mentor, trainer, author, organizational change leader, and he earned a PhD in organizational development. And his dissertation actually was on Agile transformations. He's helped clients like McDonald's, TD Ameritrade, Capital One, which is where I met him, Walgreens, Sears, AT&T, State Farm, among others. So he has quite a bit of experience. At home, he's a dedicated husband, father of 3, grandfather of 5, and one of his favorite pastimes is bicycling, where he gets some of his best ideas. Paul?
Thank you, Dave. And my partner is Dave Saboe, a fellow enterprise Agile coach, author, and a great podcaster. He is passionate about helping individuals, teams, and organizations to do the best work of their lives. He believes that in order to get value from Agile journey, you need to create the environment and conditions for the teams to succeed. Dave is a frequent presenter at Agile conferences. He worked with Capital One on their Agile transformation, and as he mentioned, that's where we met, and is now working at AIM Specialty Health to advance their Agile journey. So this is us, and let's get to our method. Is that done? Yes, I guess right. Woo-hoo. I'm 1 for 1. So this is our method. We call it the ABC culture shift model and method. And the reason we call it ABC is because we follow the alphabet around the cycle, starting at the top with A, then B, then C, D, E, and F, so as to make it easier to remember. So A stands for determine as is. In other words, the current state, that's where you start. You want to know where you are right now. B, define to be. This is where you want to go. This is your destination. This is the culture you want to achieve. C, chart a course from A to B. So this is your path. This is the course you're going to follow from your current state to your future state. D, decompose into steps. So take that course, break it down into manageable chunks. E, enact. And here we don't enact everything all at once, but we look to MVS, minimal viable step. And F, get feedback, close the loop. So this is the cycle we're going to describe in a little more detail in the upcoming slides. Any questions so far? Okay, now
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but if I do, I'll let you know.
Cool, thank you so much.
You bet.
So ABC, maybe you should say A, B, C, D, E, and F. But again, easier to remember, ABC culture shift. Next slide.
Actually, a quick question. Is this based on lean?
So yes, it is based on lean and many other things. I've learned ABC, it is mostly based on the ABC change model, which was popular way back when, and we've updated it with adding some of our things. So yes, it's based on lean, agile. It is not unique. It is just helpful to us to clarify how you would go about changing or shifting your culture.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. All right. So we're going to do a poll. And to do this, we are following or we're using AHA Slides, ahaslides.com. And I believe Dave in chat put the link. So please go to the link, fill out the poll. And the poll question is, oh, by the way, use Chrome or Firefox. They work well with AHA Slides. Internet Explorer kind of struggles with them, so please don't use Internet Explorer. Go to the link and fill out the poll. The question is, in your organization, how much recognition is there of the impact of culture? How much recognition? And you can answer none, minimal, some, much, or complete recognition. And you can choose only one, sorry. So we have 3 people in there, nobody voted yet. There we go. The votes are coming in and the race is on. So we have about, how many people do we have, Carrie?
We have got about 38 people with us tonight.
It's interesting, Dave, because I just upgraded us to 50 people. Yours is still showing 25. I wonder why.
It might just
Hopefully
be
that's
people
not a
hitting AHA
limiting
Slides.
factor. Pardon me?
I think it's just the number of people who got to that AHA Slide site.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll see.
Dave, you put Culture 101 in the chat, but it's
Oh.
Culture 102 on your slide.
Yes, it is. I
Ooh.
apologize for that.
Oh,
Ooh.
good catch.
101, 102, whatever it takes.
So we're
There
gonna
you
have
go.
to start the voting again. This is, Dave and I are in Chicago. This is normal for us.
So even as Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, leaders in your organization, do they recognize that culture has a great impact on the ability to practice Agile methods, to adopt Agile practices, to really get that value out of there?
Now, one thing I should have mentioned that I didn't was that with our ABC culture shift method, we are making some assumptions. And one of those is that there is already a transformation already in place. And our method is an add-on. It's helps you in your transformation. If you were to want to start a new transformation from scratch, you would need some preparation, some planning ahead of it before you would be able to use the ABC culture shift. It's just beyond our model currently.
So for anyone who might be having any trouble with the link, you can even use this on your phone. So just go to ahaslides.com/culture102, or you could type it in your browser if the link isn't working for you. Okay. So Paul, what are we seeing in the results so far?
So we're seeing a lot of recognition in the organizations, the participants either are working with or know about. Most of the people say there's much recognition. We have about 5 people saying complete and three people saying some, which is great, which is what we typically see and expect. Oh, there is somebody who said there's no recognition in his or her organization. So this would be a place where a culture shift may be slow, may be something that we would expect to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And we'll talk more about that later. So we had about 16 people participated so far. Yes, none means very slow culture shift, very slow. Somebody voted wrong. Maybe that's the one. That's okay. Don't worry about it.
But this is typically what we see when we ask this question. We see generally there is recognition that culture is involved here. And Paul, as you mentioned, if there isn't in your organization, it's going to be much harder to shift that culture. So it's good to see that a lot of people recognize that.
And this is something that if you were to consider a culture shift in your organization, or embedding or enacting it as part of some other transformational journey, this type of poll could be done as a first start, just to see how much recognition there is. And back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Paul. So as Paul mentioned with our ABC culture shift model, first step is to determine the as is or current state. And what we're really trying to do here is look at this from a culture standpoint and understand what are the defining characteristics that might be limiting your ability to get the most out of Agile. So what are those defining characteristics, or what's limiting your organizational culture? So one of the things you need to do is understand where you are today. And there are some common approaches to this. There's a lot of different surveys that are out there, a lot of different approaches. But what we want to do is perform this organizational assessment across the organization as much as possible. Now, most coaches that I know have looked at this, and it's more of, here's what I see. And they really don't do a broader assessment. It's more of their personal view, which in a very small organization might potentially be effective if they were there for long enough. But for a larger organization, you really have to get a broad cross section of the organization. So if you can't assess across the entire organization, at least find representative groups and make sure they're not just sending their leadership to provide input into what our culture is like, because we know there's a lot of disparity between what a leader or manager might say and what the individual contributors might say. But when we do this assessment, we want to make sure that there's a sense of a way of doing it in an anonymous way where people are open to contribute and really speak the truth. So we recommend doing an assessment digitally, or if you need to do it in small groups that kind of separate managers and their direct reports, but really create an environment where people have the safety to be able to answer honestly. And really what we're trying to do here is identify opportunities. So in order to do that, you have to set up a safe environment where people can contribute honestly. Also, when we do the assessment, we also want to make sure that we're very carefully crafting the language there. We want to try to avoid bias in the wording, even the way different options are numbered. If you have like pick A, B, C, or D, if some of the numbering gives a sense of you're not good if you're at a certain number, or you're good if you're at another number, there's a bias or bandwagon effect that takes place there. So you have to be very careful when you're doing this. And you also need to really set it up and help people understand, why are you asking these questions? So part of that is creating an awareness of what we're trying to do here, how we're trying to just see where we are culture-wise, because we want to make this a great place to work. And we need your honest input in order to do that. So really helping them to understand the why. Why are you asking these questions? How is it going to be used? In some organizations, there's a little bit of distrust, or it's been a little bit tainted because maybe people do an employee engagement survey, but nothing's ever done with that information, or nothing that's visible to them. So you have to think about the context of the folks that you're assessing, as well as what they've experienced in the past, and really help them to understand the why behind it, and do this hopefully at the start of the transformation, but really it's never too late to understand where you are and start making those small incremental steps as you move forward. So this is
before you go on,
yep.
One of the things is, once you do an assessment, you should try to establish a cadence when you're going to reassess. to see if there is a shift. Because you're after the culture shift. If you don't reassess, you will, again, you may have some opinion about the culture, but until you do the assessment, the reassessment, you really won't know. So you got to close that loop and do the reassessment.
Yep. And as we walk through, you'll see how you could build that into the plan. And certainly everything you do should be visible to folks so they know how that information is being used and what impact it's had. But as we assess the culture, we want to look at some ways of doing that. So here's a sample question that might be on a culture assessment. And this really looks at some of those Hofstede culture dimensions around things like power distance or risk tolerance and things like that. So this one says, to what degree are uncertainty, ambiguity, change, and risk tolerated in your organization? And this really ties back to, in an agile organization, is it really safe to move forward without complete information? Are we comfortable iterating? Are we comfortable doing something and failing? Are we taking acceptable risks? So we look at this dimension and say, well, we have very high uncertainty avoidance, which means we're very risk averse, or all the way to the other end, we're very open to uncertainty, ambiguity, and taking risks. So we want to help people understand when we say high or low, what does that actually look like? So what are some of those characteristics you might see? And then they can kind of score themselves based on where they see or what's true from them in their context. And you might see there are pockets in the organization where they score very differently than other departments. So there's an opportunity there to identify, are there some areas that are kind of closer to where you want to be, and maybe start there and look at the other area as something where it'll require a little more hand-holding, a little more shift involvement, or at least where to focus your energy. So as we look at this one, we're going to take another quick poll and just keep this one in mind here about, in your organization, or if you want to think of your department or maybe a past role you were in, what was the degree of uncertainty, ambiguity, or change and risk tolerance in that organization? Was it very high uncertainty avoidance with low risk tolerance, all the way up to very low uncertainty avoidance, high risk tolerance? So think about that for a moment, and we'll jump back into a poll here.
And as we're going through the poll, we're setting up for something, right? We're setting up because we want to specifically increase psychological safety. So this kind of gives us a baseline. If we have very low tolerance, then safety may also be low. If we have very high tolerance, then probably psychological safety is also very high, because those two things go very much hand in hand. So you can start voting.
I really like this tool.
Yeah, it's real time.
Yeah.
Yes, the link is the same as the last one, although you'll have to refresh your browser to get the new poll.
So good. And as the votes are coming in, this kind of curve that we're seeing here is pretty typical of a lot of organizations. And again, depends on your organization. If you're in the financial services or medical field, there might be a little bit more of an avoidance of uncertainty and lower risk tolerance. Whereas if you're in a more innovative field or even maybe software development, you might have a little bit higher risk tolerance. So controlling for some of those different types of organizations, this is typically what we see, where You have some organizations that are a little bit more risk averse, some that are in the middle, and generally that middle spot is where we see, and then not as many with that high risk tolerance, because it's still risk involved. It's about how the company thinks and approaches risk. So I see we have the most in that middle ground where there's some risk tolerance and some avoidance, and a little bit more risk averse as we go. One person mentioned that they had a little bit higher risk tolerance and more more comfort with ambiguity as they go forward in the organization, which is great to see. And again, even as part of a transformation, there's uncertainty, ambiguity, risk involved in that. So if you find an organization where your culture is already very tolerant of ambiguity and risk, you'll probably have much better traction as you go through your agile transformation. So something to think about. This could even help you get accelerated and get moving faster if an organization has more psychological safety and tolerates uncertainty and ambiguity.
And if you find yourself on the left hand where the tolerance is very low, again, your culture shift, your transformation will be very slow, because people, as part of the culture, will be very cautious about anything new, any change, anything coming up that they don't understand, and they'll avoid it. All right. So now we're moving around the cycle of the ABC culture shift model. We're on the second step, step B, define the to be, the future state. This is where you want to take the culture, or where do you want the culture to shift. This is the destination. Now, again, since this is cyclic, this is not going to, may not be the ultimate destination, because as you go through the cycle a couple times, the organization will learn and change, and therefore the future state may change with it. So don't expect this to be the de facto final destination, but a major milestone, a major wayside, if you will, on your journey. Next slide, thank you. So what we recommend is to make it very realistic, very down to earth. Start with the business objectives. Start with where the business wants to go, where the leaders are taking the business, where the drive is. By starting with those, you get a lot more buy-in. Plus, people can now relate to the culture shift and see how it supports the business objectives. Then, where the business objectives are the input, the output of your vision will include the culture shift outcomes that you want to achieve. So the business objectives are your input, your start, and the end, the outcome is the culture shift objectives. Again, our focus here is on outcomes, which are strategic, not on objectives or outputs specifically, which are more tactical. We want to create a culture, and culture is all about outcomes.
So why don't we take a look at an example?
So this is a very real example from a very real organization that I consulted. And this is not at the beginning of their transformation. This was towards the middle of their transformation. Their first visions were, how should I put it, complex. They were much longer than this one. There was a lot of verbiage that confused people. But as they learned, they started coming up with shorter and shorter statements that were more to the point. And it is wonderful to see that at the top, They start with the goals that the organization wants to achieve. Those are the business outcomes. Infusing innovation principles, mindset, and discipline throughout our core business. Enabling full agility and automation for fostering an empowered workforce, right? Those are their business objectives. This is core to their business. And then towards the bottom, you see them talking more about their culture, where they want to take their culture. And so those are the outcomes we were talking about, the end outcomes where they want to go. For this cycle, they were on a yearly cycle for these visions, and every year they would reassess their progress and adapt and change the vision as necessary. Next slide, please.
So yeah, so I wonder, just in looking at this, what comes to mind as far as what kind of culture we would need to put in place to achieve those outcomes. So
maybe in chat, we could do that. This is what we saw. If you see something else that talks to you, please feel free to put it in chat. We highlighted things that kind of resonated with us. Better products faster. So this is a common story in many organizations. They want to impress their customers, and they want to impress them very quickly because there's a lot of competition in the market. Innovation, therefore, mindset, discipline, so that you can do it repeatedly and often. Our favorite, full agility. Get the Agile program in front of everybody and everybody participating. Empower people to make decisions. And again, agility and innovation, key themes all the way through this. And our favorite word, culture, ta-da! And it's got to be habitual, which means we want to own our culture and be able to shift it and have it create the value for the client stakeholders and the firm at large. Yes, becoming more customer focused in every part of the organization, aligned to a common vision. Those are very important. Autonomy to get it done. And then you see in the outcomes, leverage emerging technology, applicable tools, leading methodologies. This is where you want the culture to be fully engaged, fully empowered in technology, tools, and methodologies, and owning it, not having it just kind of be random. And of course, again, innovation and agility. Two key points throughout this from beginning to end. Any questions, any comments on this? And again, this is only an example, so your vision would probably be different.
yeah, I see a comment about, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I saw the comment. What's interesting here is that the goal is better products faster. By their measure is innovation and agility. So, there's a recognition there. We want to get products out that are better, more innovative to our customers, and here's how we're going to go about doing it. And certainly thinking about innovation, principles, mindsets, discipline, innovation is all over this. And in order to innovate, you really need psychological safety. You need that high risk tolerance, like that poll that we just took. You need those kinds of things as part of your vision, or as part of your culture.
And please know, we're not claiming this is a perfect vision. It's just an iteration of a vision. And I'm sure that this year and last year, they probably had a different vision already. It evolved, it changed as the transformation changed, they changed the vision. So again, this is the reality of an agile transformation, a digital transformation, or any other transformation, such as a culture shift, that the vision will change. the desired outcomes will change over time, and it's always going to be a moving target. And this is the nature of the current environment we live in. Everything is fast and everything is changing.
Yeah, I would wonder what would happen if you had a culture that was very intolerant of risk, very much playing it safe, and they had a vision like this. I don't think they'd get very far.
No, no, they wouldn't. All right. So again, we're doing another poll because we love polls and we hope you guys too. Make sure you refresh your browser, same link. And the question is, what next step can you, whoa, that's the wrong poll. What happened? Which business objectives? We want which business objectives?
I might have hit twice. Hold on.
Uh-oh. Are they missing?
There we go.
There we go. Which business objectives seem most appealing to your organization? So we have listed them here. Fast time to market, fast response to changes, increase customer satisfaction, improve quality, improve productivity, reduce risk, improve employee engagement, increase revenue and reduce cost, increase sustainability, increase innovation, or something else. If it's something else, please put it in chat. We'd love to hear of what else you guys are seeing out there. And you can choose more than one. We're not limiting you to just one answer. Also, our source for these was twofold. Path to Agility, they have a list of 9, I believe. And State of Agile Survey, they have a list of, I think, 12 or so. And we kind of looked for overlaps and things that resonated with us and chose the best. So we came up with these. And as you see, it is pretty flat. People are seeing all sorts of different things. There are some front runners. We'll let everybody vote a little bit more, get their perspective out.
And as we think about these, especially the ones that are coming up for you, think about what kind of culture needs to be in place to enable these kind of business outcomes. And that's really what we're getting at here, because by starting with the business outcomes, you're driving the organization to where it wants to be. And when you talk to the leadership team about achieving those outcomes, they understand if we want this type of outcome, here's the kind of culture that we need to enable that.
Exactly. As a perfect example, we were talking about the risk avoidance. If the black bar, reduce risk, is a strong objective that the organization is pushing and wants to follow, then trying to change the culture into a risk tolerant organization may be very difficult. It might be very counter to the direction that the organization wants to go, and it probably is not a good idea because that type of culture shift either would be a very great failure, or it could disrupt the culture to the point where there would be deep problems in the organization. But we do see that faster response to changes, that's a common one. Improve quality, yes, and increase revenue, reduce risk, yes. There's a common saying, better, faster, cheaper. And that
so and this will even give you insights if you are leading an agile transformation, starting with that why, what kind of outcomes are we looking for with it, helps you focus and really helps you to identify how you need to shape the culture.
So it's also interesting to me that the yellow on the right, increased sustainability, is rather low, which in times of crisis, such as the pandemic has caused, things like sustainability take a second or a third seat in priority. because there are higher, more important things the organization wants to address.
Cool. Great information. All right, so now as we look at this, we shift from the as is to understanding the to be, and now we know where we were and where we want to be. Now we start to chart the course. So we want to go from how do we get from that as is to the to be. And one of the things as we think about this is understanding, again, what kind of business outcomes do you want and what kind of culture does it take to get there? And in order to do that, you kind of use that as is and to be, and then you start to create a roadmap, just like we would for any kind of product development. If our culture is a product that we have in our mind, then we want to try to create a roadmap for that. So again, we start with those type of outcomes that we want to be able to achieve, and then start thinking about, okay, if those are our outcomes, what's going to enable that? So we basically create a roadmap that helps us to identify how we're going to shape the culture, a roadmap that's outcome based, and these enablers that lead us to the outcomes. These are really things that promote the desired behaviors that we want to see, which in turn lead to those outcomes that we want to see. But we also want to think about what obstacles might stand in our way. And you think about this up front, but it's something you keep going back to. You know, what are some things that we are encountering that we didn't observe before or didn't think of before, but what obstacles might stand in the way? And for those obstacles, what are some interventions that I can do to address those barriers? So as you start to think about that as is and to be and build out the roadmap, think about what would enable the right behaviors and what obstacles might stand in the way that I need to design interventions for. And right here is an example of a culture shift roadmap. You can see we start with the objective. So in that example vision, we had infuse innovation principles, mindsets and disciplines throughout our core business. Those are some of the objectives we talk about, and even fostering an empowered workplace. And then you start thinking about what kinds of things does a culture need in order to enable those. So we come up with certain focus areas like increase psychological safety, decrease power distance, meaning that the people with boots on the ground have more decision-making authority, so we're able to delegate that decision-making to them. And then if those are our focus areas for a culture, what kind of enablers or impediment removers can we put in place to help shift that culture in a small way? So for example, for psychological safety, part of it might be around educating leaders on what psychological safety is and how to act and the impact that it could have on an organization. So maybe it's a training class, maybe it's literature, maybe it's something else where you build that foundation with leaders. Maybe you've observed, and I'll give you an example, that the language that leaders are using is causing a lack of psychological safety. For example, I was in an art level retrospective, and we were reviewing the feedback and information as a big group, and someone mentioned that they didn't feel that it was safe to speak up, and the chief product manager literally got up, slammed his hand on the table and said, "Who's saying we don't have the ability to speak up here? I want to know who doesn't feel safe here."
Wow.
And it was hilarious because every single person, I was in the corner of the room, every single person kind of looked down. One woman with long hair actually pulled her hair and hid her face. I had to have a talk with the guy afterwards. I kind of pulled him out of the room, and he wasn't with the organization for much longer, not because of that, but that just shows you how just unaware people can be. And again, once I talked to him, he realized what he did, but at the time he just destroyed any psychological safety. So he set that area back a long time. Other things you could do, like story sharing. You know, how can we share our stories of success or what we're doing or what we're challenged with? How do we share those and broadcast that out more? Even the way we facilitate. So how do we just facilitate meetings to enable that psychological safety, making sure people feel safe to speak up, making sure everyone has a voice, making sure we're considering people who might be introverted. How do we facilitate in the right way? Creating open space events where people can work together and try to overcome a common challenge and really engage people. Something like Failure Fridays that we'll talk about in a little bit, something where we share information about our failures and kind of promote them as learning experiences is really good for psychological safety. And then you could see other things here with employee engagement as well. Things like delegation poker. If you're not familiar with that, it's a way of Management 3.0 has information on this of really understanding what can we delegate and to what level. So it's a way of negotiating your delegation and including building on that delegation as you get more and more comfortable with delegation. Leadership coaching, hackathons, which could address psychological safety and power distance. And then a culture reassessment. So we
Can
do
you
want
talk
to
about
reassess
that?
pieces.
Can you
Sorry, go
talk
ahead.
about that power distance? Decreased power distance? I'm not sure if I understand that. I would have thought
So-
it'd be increased power distance, but
So
I
let
could be
me
reading it
let me
wrong.
explain. It's a little bit confusing. Yes, some of these characteristics, again, they are standard. This is standard nomenclature across organizations that use Hofstede. This is Hofstede's Cultures and Organizations book, by the way.
Yeah.
I have it here. And what power distance is the difference in power between people at different level. So if I'm your boss and I have much more power than you, then the power distance is higher. If I'm your boss, but the difference in power between you and me is minor, then the power distance is low. So for empowerment and agility and a lean culture, you want to decrease the power distance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Usually when I go into places, I say, give them sort of, what do I usually say? Now I forgot. Usually I ask them to sort of hold back the space, more of the power space, so that the particularly management is not, or they're not encumbering the team. So I haven't used this term before, but I'll look it up and read it a bit more
Sure.
and get more understanding. Thank you.
Sure.
And
you're
certainly
welcome.
use whatever terminology works for you. If it's distributed power, whatever works for you or whatever will resonate with you in your organization. This is just based on Hofstede's culture dimensions. He talks about decrease or increase power distance.
Yeah, thank you.
And there are 6, well, the old model 6, new model 7. And Dave and I actually, because of the technology transformations we've gone through and others, we've increased some of the characteristics to better reflect a deeper understanding of culture. But again, this is not this presentation.
So as we build this roadmap, you'll have some things in here like the education and coaching and things like that. But some of these are experiments. So we'll put something on there and then we'll kind of get feedback via the results that'll validate or invalidate a hypothesis or whatever, and we'll adjust based on feedback. So again, just like we would tell product teams, you set a roadmap, it doesn't mean it can't change. We want to be able to experiment in here. So this is kind of a living roadmap that we would want to adjust as we discover new things or as we understand what's happening and understand if we need to continue or if we need to pivot or if we need to maybe abandon something that we're doing that's not working or having the opposite outcome that we want to have.
So it's empirical, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you want to find a way to measure a lot of those. You know, what are you expecting to see? And we'll talk about measurement in a moment as well.
Thanks.
So after we've charted our course, now, of course, we have to make it something we can actually do, something we can consume. So we want to decompose it into steps. So we start with the as is, went to the to be, charting a course. Now we're taking that course and charting it into individual steps. And when we look at this, we're really taking that roadmap and turning those enablers into behaviors, turning obstacles into interventions. Basically, we're creating a backlog. So take that roadmap, decompose it into a backlog. Again, thinking about some of the obstacles that you'll encounter along the way, but realizing that there probably is going to be obstacles that you won't be able to foresee and you'll have to adapt to as you encounter them. And then try to prioritize, what makes sense to do first? What'll have the biggest impact, or what's the small step that you can take to move forward? And depending on what you're trying to achieve, that'll mean different things. One way that I like to think about this, a coach recently, David Hussman, who passed away about 2 years ago, he came up with this concept known as Dude's Law. And he's called the Dude because David Hussman looks exactly like the dude in that in a famous movie about bowling that the name always escapes me. But his law states that value equals Y over how. So in order to get more value, you either find something with a bigger Y, so something that'll have a bigger impact, or something that has a low how, a smaller how. Is there a simple way to achieve that big outcome? So if we either increase that numerator or decrease the denominator, we get more value. So as you're looking at that backlog of potential enablers or interventions that you could do, think about that value. Think about the why. What impact will it have? What audience will this apply to? Is it just applicable to a small group of folks, or is it applicable to a large area? And thanks, Jeff and David. Big Lebowski is a movie. I could never remember that name. Or think of, okay, we have this why. What's the simplest way of achieving that? Maybe it's a holding lean coffee sessions. That's something quick and easy we can do if it has a big impact. So that's one way I like to really look at value when I'm prioritizing really anything, the why over the how. So as you're looking at your backlog and decomposing things, think about what'll have a big impact with a little effort, and start to do those first, keeping in mind any risks or dependencies or unknowns that you need to discover first. So with that, why don't we jump into a little activity? And again, we're going to do another kind of poll, only this is a little bit different. So we're going to use this to brainstorm a little bit. So what we want to do is brainstorm a little on the topic of, if we had a goal in our culture of increasing psychological safety, what are some small activities we can do? So on your computer or phone or whatever, you should see a box where you can type in text. Let's just brainstorm for a moment. What kinds of things could we do, or maybe things you've seen done or done yourself, to try to increase psychological safety? So give that a little bit of thought. So I see leaders showing fallibility. Yeah, that vulnerability is really powerful. Unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't like doing that. So part of it that involves educating them on what it is. I was at a conference a number of years ago, and I was talking to a leader about the power of vulnerability, and they weren't buying it. There's no way I could be vulnerable. So you certainly have certain personalities who won't do that. Building trust, yeah. Inclusion efforts, yeah. How do we get people to get involved, to self-organize? And that's where some of those things like hackathons or open space might come in handy. Letting go, that's a big one and a tough one. Begin each meeting with a casual talk to get to know each other better. Yeah, that's great. If we know each other, we form bonds and start to feel safer with each other. Acceptance of failure, that's a tough one, but if you can get that to work, it's really good. As people are putting more on there, please continue contributing. At a prior organization, we did a scrum of scrums and all the leaders attended there. And during that scrum of scrums, whenever anyone would raise an impediment, the reaction from the leaders is, who's responsible for that? We need to talk about this. So we coach the leaders outside of that because people were starting to be afraid to raise impediments. We coached them on the impact of their language and what they were saying and gave them this advice. We said, do you want people to raise impediments and make that visible? Of course we do. We got to do something about them. Okay, the way you're talking is inhibiting that. They don't want to bring those up. So if you want them to bring it up, how about the next time someone raises an impediment, say, thank you. Now we could do something about that. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. And the next meeting, someone raised an impediment, leader stood up and said, thank you. I appreciate your openness. Now we could do something about it. Let me know how I could help you solve this. And all the other teams were like, wow, okay, yeah, I have an impediment too. I do too. So helping them understand the language and the impact they're having is really powerful. I see leaders modeling the desired behavior, absolutely. Rewards for speaking up. Yeah, even a thank you, trustworthy. Activities and icebreakers, masks, I like that. Support a culture of learning, celebrate failure. Yeah, we fail. I mean, think of SpaceX when their multi-million-dollar rockets blow up on the launch pad, they clap. Hey, we failed. Awesome. We learned something. We learned something new. So yeah, celebrating failure is really big, emphasizing failure. And everyone's afraid of failure. We really need to turn that failure into learning and really view it as a learning opportunity. Okay. Great stuff. Nice.
Quick question.
Yep.
Why do you think everyone's afraid of failure? Is there something deeper than that?
Well, I think that is a very common human characteristic. Traditionally, failure is viewed as a step towards death psychologically, and success is a step towards life. And usually, in most Western cultures, especially, failure is punished, success is rewarded. So it is normal for people to kind of shun and avoid and fear failure. And even though, when you think about it, we fail every day at something. In fact, if you look at little kids, they constantly fail, get up, and keep doing it again until they learn. And, like walking, get up, fall, get up, fall, get up, fall, get up, stand. And, oh, I'm standing, yay. And that's the normal behavior, is through failure. We learn through failure. But as we grow older and older and older, that's pushed out of us. Failure is viewed as a big no-no. Don't fail. You got to succeed. Most of our sports have winners and losers. Who wants to be a loser? You failed. You lost. Don't do it again. You must
So
win.
really, the underlying training we get there is more about shame, isn't it?
It is. Yes, very much. Shame, punishment, all of those bad things that we want to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So let me share you an example of Failure Fridays. And what Failure Fridays is nothing new. It's been around for a while. It's been discussed in many ways. The idea is that once a week on Friday, people would share failures to learn from them. And you may think is, how does that start? And so one of the things that I've learned and observed a couple of times is, and I'll use an example, a developer or a tester decides to share with his team at staff meetings on Friday what he or she has learned, because let's say it's a developer and he or she now wants to learn to test. So he or she is learning. And as they're learning, they're sharing their learning. Oh, this is what I learned this week. This is what I learned next week. And other people enjoy it. So they start sharing their learnings. Well, after a while, this developer notices that people are going to say, well, how did this learning come about? Well, I tried something, it didn't work, and so I had to try something else, read a book, whatever, ask a friend, and I finally learned what to do. So there is an implication that something didn't work that I tried, and as they get more comfortable with that, other people start sharing what they tried that didn't work, and after a while, those sharing become more and more focused on, hey, I tried something, it failed, and I learned from it, and now I'm better off it. And maybe you can avoid the same and learn from me. And how about you? What did you fail with and learn? And in this particular example, this kept going, and people started sharing and giving a lot of positive feedback to those learnings, those failures, and started doing it themselves. Other teams noticed that this was working for this team, and they also started doing that. And so Failure Fridays became a part of the normal way of doing things. Is your team doing Failure Fridays? If not, try it. And again, you got to start slow, because again, for people who are where psychological safety is low, there's going to be a big fear factor. So you can't dump it on everybody all at once. You got to start with very small steps. Like I say, what have I learned? Maybe try it as stand-up, saying, hey, this is what I learned since last stand-up. Questions?
So not a question, Paul, but I think one thing, if you are in a culture with that low failure tolerance, that could be one of those obstacles that we talk about. So Paul, in your thoughts, what would be an intervention be?
You mean outside of Failure Fridays?
Now, if there were maybe leaders who weren't comfortable with failure, they expected a different behavior.
Yes. So thank you for mentioning this. It is very important as these interventions, these experiments, because this is what they really are, as experiments get started, to kind of share with leaders what we are doing and why are we doing it and how we are doing it, and the overall direction and intent, so that our agenda is crystal clear to everybody, that we're not doing this on the sly. But again, after you let them know, you also have to tell them what the expectation or expected behavior is on them, so that the leaders see this as a positive step towards a future culture that will be better than the current one is. Because if they don't see it as an improvement, they're going to say, no, don't do it. I don't want the risk. So the risk has to be low from their perspective. The payout has to be high, and the investment has to be, again, low. So that value factor is high, the why over how. Any questions? Do we see anything on, oh, somebody has to run. Thank you very much. Great to talk to you again, Jeff.
No other questions yet. Just conversation back and forth in the chat.
Okay.
No questions yet. But to everyone, please jump in. Yeah, if you have some.
All right. So this is enact. Again, once we've gone through some road mapping and decomposition of the roadmap, and we have a backlog, now it's time to start actually putting things into play. And we've coined something called MVS, minimum viable step, which is the minimal we can do that's still going to be viable and valuable to the organization, and we'll be able to measure and show progress. So this minimum viable step is what we want to come out with. And there is no magic around it. There is no, you could estimate it if you want with points or something like that eventually, but just starting with the mindset of, hey, let's try something simple, something straightforward first, before we go after some of the complex things. And so here are some examples for MVS. And again, we're talking about experiments, so the smallest meaningful enabler or intervention we can try as an experiment, kind of as a definition. And these examples, specifically, we're talking about building psychological safety. How can we build psychological safety? So here are some examples. Lean coffee. It is a democratic way of building an agenda in the meeting that you're having. So you don't come with a prepared agenda, but you build it in the meeting. It engages everyone, levels the playing field, empowers the people participating. And again, the hope is over time, it builds psychological safety. Another
Question,
one,
do you have a capacity for lean coffee? Do you have a suggestion of how many people should be there?
so again, there are books and articles about lean coffees. There are limits. Some people say that I think they recommend at a lean coffee no more than 12. Others say that's too big. Others say as well, you could probably do it with anybody as long as there's a facilitator or moderator. So I try not to judge. I recommend starting again small and simple. So maybe at a staff type or a team meeting. Try that before let's say you invite 200 people and say, hey, let's have a lean coffee, because that could get a little bit overwhelming unless people.
Yeah, I started a lean coffee with a lot of people. It was like 40 people, and some of them were comfortable speaking, so that's kind of good for other people to learn. But it wasn't enough that I wanted to get, so I broke it down in the smaller groups into teams actually, and we're doing on the functional side as well. So that was a lot better. So I shifted my lean coffee to kind of just a training session, kind of this is 30 minutes. This is kind of what we're going to talk about. If you've got anything you put in, then I can take care of that. So it kind of found adjustment by itself.
Yes.
Yeah, and if one of your goals for this experiment is to build psychological safety, I'd highly recommend starting smaller. For the point that you just mentioned, if you have a larger group, people feel less safe to be able to kind of stick their neck out and speak up.
Paul, one thing I found really interesting is as an experiment for lean coffees, I didn't get people to vote on the board, as it were. I found well, this was when we were not remote, but I gave each thing a number, and then people had to write the number they wanted, like in a cup, and they put it in a cup. And so you didn't get any visual biases on like where the votes were going. And every time I ran it as an experiment, that people said, oh, I didn't think that was going to get picked, right? And every time I didn't do it that way, it was just like, the first 3 people and everybody else just went for what they thought. So I found that it leveled the playing field by hiding the votes.
Yes. Yeah, and Miro allows you to do the same thing where you can vote on Post-its and they won't see it until you're done scoring. So yeah, anytime you can make that anonymous is good.
Yes. And then another example, open space. So for example, if you have more people than you want to start a lean coffee with, you can say, okay, instead, let's do an open space, which again, besides accommodating more people, it also can accommodate more topics. And you can separate into subgroups, people, gathering where they're interested, and then brainstorming the solutions, or even the topics, or even the agendas in those subgroups, right? Of course, nowadays we have to do it virtually. And as we did at the beginning, using those break rooms is a great way of having a virtual open space. And again, the idea is to bring out people, quote unquote, out of their shell and make it safer to either join a group or move to a different group and non-confrontationally walk away, again, voting with your feet. A much more challenging one, of course, would be difficult conversations. And before you do anything with difficult conversations, you probably want to either get some training, read up on it, and then once you know how difficult conversations work, practice with a friend, practice with a friendly group so that you get comfortable in the patterns. And then you can bring the patterns out to other people, share them with the other people. And again, do some practice runs. Don't jump into the deep water and have difficult conversation with your manager or your executive without practicing with other people. We talked about Failure Fridays, and Dave has mentioned language shifting, and what that is, for example, talking about people, not resources. We're all human beings, we're people, we're not objects. Talking about we, not us and them, right? We're all in this together. It's we, not them, those guys. Common way of talking about them is the business, where we are all part of the business. Everyone in the organization is the business. And there's other things you can try. These are just some very simple examples that I wanted to share. I found slideshow karaoke was a fun way. Yes. So these are more team building, but yes, karaoke and other such team events are very much encouraged as a way of having people share and getting them to increase their safety and comfortability with speaking up. All right, last step, closing the loop, getting feedback. This is before you repeat the loop. You want to make sure that whatever you did, whatever experiment, you get some feedback. You close the loop. And again, if we're looking at it, the question is, how do we act on the feedback? That is kind of the key, whether it's metrics, reviews, surveys, assessments, retrospectives, however you get the feedback, you have to make sure you close the loop. You act on the feedback, because if you don't act the feedback, the question that's begging is, why did you collect it? Why did you go after that feedback if you didn't do anything with it? What do you typically do with the feedback? Some common examples are you continue with the experiment, you pivot, you change the experiment, or you abort the experiment because it didn't work. Again, there may be some other options, but those are typically the three most common options within experiments: continue, pivot, or abort. CPA, easy to remember. For the experiments that work, and then you want to make sure they continue in the organization, you have to reinforce them. You have to find ways of reinforcing whatever worked so that it keeps working. A key element here is to remember about change fatigue. If you try too many experiments at once before the culture settles, you're going to get change fatigue, and there's going to be resistance in the culture. So that's why we talk minimal viable step, one step at a time rather than two or three.
Yeah, and Paul, that's a good point that I think a lot of us forget. Even when you're building in the roadmap, build in those rest periods. If anyone's read the book Anti-Fragile, when we think about the eustress, the positive stress, it really makes us stronger. You need stress, then rest, because without that rest in the middle and being able to kind of recover from that it's like a rubber band that's going to break. So we want to make sure we're not introducing change fatigue. We're not kind of inflicting people with change. We want to be able to introduce change and rest and get people accustomed to that, then introduce change and rest and not overwhelm. So great point, Paul.
Yes, and especially with culture, right? You want the culture to settle. So here's some feedback loops. And again, there are running example Failure Fridays. And these loops, you could kind of think of them as the leading indicators. In other words, looking at some metrics in meetings that will tell us if we're going in the right direction. So in the number or growth of participants, if more and more people are participating in Failure Fridays, that's a good thing. If fewer people are participating, you probably want to ask why. Why is this no longer important or attracting people? Number and growth of presenters. Are more and more people not only coming but also presenting and sharing and sharing their learnings and failures? Number of engaged leaders. How many leaders, executives, managers, whoever you consider a leader, are coming to these sessions to either participate or listen? Number of comments. How many people are making comments as others are sharing and saying, hey, I've also seen that. Oh, I also had a similar failure. Or are they just sitting there and there's no comments, which probably would be a little bit concerning. And so you may want to ask, if you're not familiar with Nico, ask, how are you feeling? And Nico is just a way of very quickly assessing, either through post-it notes, somebody said different colored marbles, some kind of anonymous way to show. And if you don't want anonymous, people feel very comfortable, thumbs up, thumbs down. But again, initially, you probably want to make it anonymous, smiley face, sad face, on a sticky note in a bucket, so that people don't see who's putting which face, is an easy way of doing Nico. Some outside of meeting, some lagging indicators would be number of extensions. Now, what an extension is, something that grew out of Failure Fridays. For example, would be failures at demos. If people are beginning to share not only their successes at demos, but also their failures and learnings as an extension of Failure Fridays, that's a great thing. Failures or learnings of the month, having some kind of either a way of doing this at the monthly meeting, a program review, a system demo, or whatever it is, people sharing this, would be a nice extension to notice. And then further down the road, you may have people doing white hat hackers, and inviting white hat hackers and having events of that type, white hat hacking events. And if you don't know what white hat hacking is, it's just a very transparent, friendly way of trying to hack the system, to break into the system, to uncover vulnerabilities, and to be able to, of course, fix them. Another one would be backseating. What backseating is before some kind of a event, you see the bug in the system to see if that event can find it, can capture it before it destroys the system. And again, these are just examples of more and more broader failures, and failure being accepted and rewarded in the organization. And some trailing indicators would be other, surveys, retention numbers going up or down, employee satisfaction, net promoter scores, empowering one-on-ones, and personal development goals and achievement, and so forth. Any comments on this?
Yes, it's Max. I'd like to share a comment. And the comment I wanted to share was specifically, I have had so many people have a tough time with failures. And I totally get all this that you're saying, but I've noticed that when you start to phrase it in a way as learnings, even if people understand, oh, I'm learning because I failed at something and I learned something from the failure, there's almost a mindset switch that learnings are valuable. Learnings are appreciated by like the people that make the decisions, and so all of a sudden people are more comfortable having to think of failures when they think of learnings right by it. And I'm not sure if other people have had the same experience as I did on that, or maybe it's just how I come across. I have to work on my communication. But I just feel that that is important to make a very close connection to what you learn from the failure, because or else people still feel as if it's a failure. And I understand your point, make people feel comfortable with failure and all of that. But I feel that there's a mindset shift that has to happen, and that helps.
Yes.
Absolutely,
That's-
Max. And Paul, you talked about the language shift. And in a lot of organizations I've seen, the common term is fail fast. They change that to learn fast. They know they do it through failure, but they purposely substitute the word learning in there whenever the word failure would be.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I this is something that is very true. And you really do want to be careful of the current culture. If, as you said, failure is just such a taboo word, right? Because it is taboo. And you start with learning, at some point, once you see the culture has shifted, you can step back and say, okay, how did this learning come about? What happened to cause that learning? And as you're able to get people more and more comfortable with sharing their learnings and what caused it, what was the cause of that learning, eventually they themselves get back to, yes, I tried that, it didn't work. Oh, so this incident, and again, it's not a failure, it's an incident, right? Cause the learning. Well, what caused the incident? Right? You can always keep asking what caused it, and eventually people are, well, that was a problem, that was a bug, which, okay, that's a failure, But again, there's a lot of shame associated with the word, so we avoid it. We know better than that.
And Paul, I think you gave a great example. When a baby's learning to walk, when they stand up and fall down, we don't look at them and go, oh, you failed. I said, oh man, did you see that? You were up for a second and a half. Keep going. And they get up, they fall down. They get up, they fall down. And eventually they're up a little bit longer. And that's learning. That's how we learn. And somewhere along the way, we lost all that. So, I think, and I like what Mike said, fail is first attempt at learning. We just have to shift the mindset. And if that involves changing the language, that'll get us there.
Bingo. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's take a look at kind of what we've covered today. And when we think about agile transformations, those really need to include the associated culture shift. And I think that's an area where a lot of coaches and change agents kind of forget that we have to look at the culture along with it and create that right human operating system upon which agile and all the right behaviors run. So there's a tight coupling with agile transformations and culture. So we really need to look at that as part of the transformation and start out with that. Where are we now? Understand what the current state of the culture is and how that either enables or inhibits the outcomes that we want to see, both as a business and through agility, that why of agility. And then looking at that, what's our to be? Where do we want to go? Where do we need to go in order to achieve those outcomes we want to achieve? And then start charting a course from where we are now to where we want to be, build out that roadmap. If here's where we want to go and here's the path, how are we going to get there? And then slice it down even further. What are some experiments we can run? What's that minimum viable step to get the ball rolling and get feedback along the way so that we can adjust the path and continue this path? And Paul mentioned before, let's make sure that we're reassessing the culture on a regular cadence so that we can continue this loop. And note that it's not necessarily a linear cycle. So you might do an initial assessment and define the to be and create a vision, chart a course, start decomposing it. As you're decomposing it, that might spark some idea on something you need to change to a course, or as you're enacting that step or experiment, it might provide insight into well, maybe I assess the culture a little bit wrong here. Maybe this area is where I need to focus. So imagine more like an interconnected web here as you go through this cycle. And that's really what we're talking about. Really, the feedback is throughout, and we want to be observant throughout and be able to quickly adapt to change. But this is something where through following these processes or this method, we're able to put some structure around how we kind of nudge the culture in the right direction and really start looking at what behaviors would enable the culture that we want to create, and recognizing and rewarding those behaviors and slowly shifting that culture to one that's more aligned with Agile values and principles to enable some of those right business outcomes.
Kind of two comments. One is, while this seems linear, in practice it isn't. You will find that you would have to go back and forth. As you learn, as you go, for example, as you're charting the course, you may go and tweak the vision. As you're decomposing into steps, you may tweak the course, and so forth and so on, all the way throughout. Second step is, we call it a culture shift, and that is intentional, because culture is very difficult to change. But if you use that minimum viable step to tweak the culture, to shift it a little bit, it's much easier than causing a major change. And as we know, those little tweaks, little shift over time add up to the big shift, which is what we're after. So kind of remember those two things: non-linear and a shift, not a change.
Yep. And what we're doing is we're really shifting or nudging the culture intentionally in a direction. A lot of times people won't consider the culture. And guess what? The culture is going to be there whether you help shape it or not. So let's kind of nudge it in the right direction, one that's more aligned to where we need to be, and be intentional about the culture is really what we're getting at. So again, this was a very, very brief overview of some of the culture shift method. There's a lot of pieces to each of those, and we just picked out some characteristics or some pieces that are aligned to each of those different steps in that culture shift method. We have more information on the website cultureforagility.com, including a lot of the resources and different approaches that we've applied in our thinking here. And we do have a workshop where it goes into much more detail than we can cover in an hour and a half here, to help you really understand how to shift a culture, and dives a lot deeper into some of these. Of course, we had a limited time today to cover that, but we hope you found value in what we presented, and hopefully it